Welcome back. My name is Keith Parsons, and you're listening to Heavy Wireless, part of the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. Yeah, try to say that 3 times fast. I'm here at WPC again with Stephen Orr. He's with Cisco, and he's like the security guru. And one of the evenings, we had kind of a birds of a feather event in the evening, and sometimes we, have something like tonight's one on Wi-Fi 7. Last night, there was one on Wi-Fi security, and Stephen hosted it. So, Stephen, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Keith, and thanks. And phenomenal event. WLPC has been great in Phoenix. First time here in WLPC in Phoenix. I attended Prague the last time, and the number of presentations, the information, phenomenal. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a birds of a feather on security. It was great.
Well, glad you're here. Glad you're a first timer. By the way, we usually have about a third every conference. We have about a third are newbies, and we love you and like you to come back. Last night, you had a standing room only group of people who took all the seats because they wanted to talk about Wi-Fi security. Can you give us like 3 things that were the big talking points last night?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'll give you the first one. I think one of the key things is with Wi-Fi 7 coming out, and even some of the older generation, Wi-Fi 6, 6E, and 5, is there's a confusion between what I'll call a generational brand and the standards, which, again, for Wi-Fi 7, it's 802.11be is what came out. And it's what constitutes the AP versus kind of the connection that you have. So the first one was really trying to level set the crowd on, from a security perspective, what do I need to establish a Wi-Fi 7 connection? So that was kind of the bulk of the conversation is what is a Wi-Fi 7 connection between an endpoint and an AP, and MLO is a big topic. So in the standards area, MLO, multi-link operation, and extremely high throughput, which are the new data rates for MLO or for Wi-Fi 7. They're used synonymous and really interchangeably. So from a security perspective, really that's kind of what defines Wi-Fi 7 for the security side. So if we need to establish that connection, we're going to have some specific security parameters. Now, it's not saying a Wi-Fi 7 certified by the Wi-Fi Alliance AP can't accept Wi-Fi 6 clients, Wi-Fi 6E or 5, or, back a couple generations. It's just if you want to take advantage of the latest and greatest Wi-Fi 7 brand, you have to adhere to certain security practices or protocols that are going to be instituted. So.
And that's no different than every generation we've had. Wi-Fi has been backwards compatible basically forever. I mean, you can still, if you have a 2.4 gig and you allow it, you can use 802.11b rates, even prime rates if they're turned on. So the standard didn't change with that. You had mentioned in this connection, what might be different in a Wi-Fi 6 connection versus a Wi-Fi 7 connection?
Yeah, so what we try to do from an industry perspective as we move through the standards, so just real quick on a high level. So IEEE creates the actual protocols. The Wi-Fi Alliance does a really great job of trying to take what's coming out of the standards organizations and wrap a brand around it. Like this is Wi-Fi 7, this is Wi-Fi 6E, and kind of the capabilities that you can expect when you buy that product. So what we try to do as we move along from an industry perspective is we try to advance capabilities, we try to advance security, because we're always dealing with challenges, attacks, threats that advance as compute power advances. So some of the things that we've done with going from, say, Wi-Fi 6 to 6E, I know we've had a lot of folks go, well, why did you remove WPA3 PSK from 6E? What we're trying to do is, with these new 5 generations, new capabilities, remove some of the old stuff to try to advance and move forward.
And it's no different than we deprecated WEP. And then we came back and punished people if you turned it on.
Right. And back then, right, with whether it's WEP or whether it's TKIP, we kind of confined it to a specific generation. So like TKIP was like the last one you could use it with was 802.11n, and you got stuck on 802.11n data rates. So if you think about what we did in Wi-Fi 6E, we kind of drew a line in the sand and said, hey, you have to use WPA3. And
it's time.
It's
WPA3 has been around a while, and its adoption wasn't moving as quickly as some of us had hoped. So it was an opportunity to say, you have 1,200 on the U.S., 1,200 megahertz of new spectrum. be secure in it.
And it's a greenfield. So we didn't have to look back and say, what are we going to do for backward compatibility? Because it was brand new spectrum and it's never been done. So when we looked at Wi-Fi 7, very similar to 6E, where the 6 gigahertz spectrum, it's like we're doing this multi-link operation or multi-link devices. The opportunity was there to institute new security capabilities when you're connecting at these extremely high throughput / multi-link operation data rates. So in that case, we're like, let's further the cause of WPA3. So in this case, we instituted another ACAM for SAE. And we basically said WPA2 is no longer allowed for personal networks within multi-link operation or these extremely high throughput data rates.
Thinking of not all the enterprise vendors, but thinking of more of the, I don't know, TKIPs, D-Links, SOHO level things, that sounds a little scary since not all home devices have those, the ability to talk those AKMs.
Yes, and so we actually thought through that. There was a lot of good discussion within both IEEE and the other standards organizations on, well, what do we do? So in the last 5 years, it's very difficult to find whether it's a home access point, an enterprise access point that doesn't allow you to have multiple SSIDs, be able to create some kind of segmentation. So the initial thought was, well, we have the capabilities today that we didn't have 10 years ago to be able to institute different security policies and, take your older devices, put them on, I'll call it a legacy network, and then kind of advance. If I put my enterprise security hat on, the chances that you want it to have a mix, like if we were talking about VPNs or IPsec, that you want to put, higher security devices and lower security devices on the same network, it's not common practice. So that's kind of the thought process we've been going through and with the transition to WPA3 in general.
So that brings up a question. What about Wi-Fi 7 devices that aren't 6 gig capable? And they are making some of those. Yeah.
So with that, so interesting enough, so Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, with 6E we got the 6 gigahertz band. Wi-Fi 7, there's no requirement within 802.11be or within the Wi-Fi 7 spec that says I have to support all 3 bands. So you could have devices that support 2.4 and 5 gigahertz and be Wi-Fi 7 capable.
Yet as an industry, you've said, if you want the features of MLO, you have to support WPA3.
Correct. So even in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band, I would need to be able to, in order to do multi-link operation EHT, I still have to support WPA3 personal at a minimum in order to get access to MLO and the enhanced data rates.
Well, we've been doing this 25 plus years, and I just kudos to you and the team and everyone in the industry is finally putting, that's a little bit of pressure on some people. But from an enterprise standpoint, one of the questions that I come across with my customers is, okay, how do we do 6 gig and 5 gig one SSID and help the transition? Now, I use transition more of a verb there. It's also a noun.
So for those that know me, my position on transition modes is they're very difficult, right? With transition modes, we're trying to maximize interoperability and not necessarily maximize security. So it's really a trade-off. So like with the 6 gigahertz band that you mentioned, we made there from an industry perspective, there's kind of a hard stance. There's no transition modes. There's no legacy protocols because it's a brand new band. So there's some hard decisions, or planning decisions you have to make as an organization, as a customer. Like, how do I want to include 6 gigahertz in my, my customer journey, my end user journey? And this is really where we've advanced in being able to create multiple SSIDs that can actually accommodate multiple bands, multiple security. So we had this conversation. Well, actually, part of the conversation last night was like, how do I handle this in a university setting where we're typically in the 2.4 and 5 band where I have an SSID that's shared amongst multiple people, and now I add 6 gigahertz, what do I do?
Sounds like you're referring to a little eduroam problem.
It is a little eduroam problem. So
being that it's eduroam, we kind of take away that ability to say, oh, we're going to have multiple SSIDs.
Right.
So that solves a lot of problems, but in the edge room space, they're kind of stuck.
And it creates a new problem, right? In that case where we have what I would call a well-known SSID that we need to connect to. So one of the things that we kind of discussed was, can I have an edge room, let's call it a specific SSID, a well-known SSID, can I leave it in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band so that when my visitors come, they know how to connect to that one? And maybe I create another SSID for my local users, right, that I can use all 3 bands and use the latest security that are kind of on-prem that we own, we control. However, they're kind of stitched in the back end.
With the same SSID? Or you're talking about referring to a new SSID?
2 different SSIDs, one for the visitors, which would be your vanity SSID, like, again, if we referenced it, like Edge Room. Edge Room would universally be the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band for the near future until we ubiquitously deploy, the 6 gigahertz cable devices. And then your on-prem, the folks that are part of your organization, your organizational capabilities, you give them the access to another SSID that can still reference.
Still have the same authentication process.
So and I think we've, from an industry perspective, we've tied the SSID to the authentication server versus the SSID just being a placeholder for the authenticator. Because I would ask you, how many folks know what VLAN they connect to
Yes. But part of EduRoam and Open Roaming and other, you call them vanity SSIDs, are that they're memorable. And people know them and they see it and they join. So it's kind of hard to change those. But this problem isn't just for 6 gig. We had 2.4 EduRoam, 5 gig EduRoam. Mm-hmm. And if you allow a 5 gig capable client to roam to 2.4, they will have a bad day. And they're hurting all the people who can't go anywhere else.
Right.
So it's not like we haven't seen this before. Kind of reminds me also of the transition mode from when we had TKIP and we turned it on because we're going to turn this off as soon as, and we had this idea, and I went back to customers many years later, and transition mode just was there because, and everyone was just afraid, well, we're going to lose some clients if we turn it, like 7, 8-year-old clients. Yeah, we can't. And eventually, when N came out, it was like, okay, we got to stop this. So I'm glad we have this cycle where we come back and have a little bit of sanity and say we really do need to address the security. Any other good topics that came up last night?
Yeah, so there was a lot of great discussion in general, right? And as I said, we started kind of what makes up a connection. That's kind of where we started with the Wi-Fi 7 piece. Then kind of moving beyond that is really the SSID. Like, what are we transforming the SSID into? Is it kind of like a container? Basically, it's just a name, and then how do I authenticate? How do I authorize devices onto the network? And one of the big topics that did come up was onboarding. So whether it's onboarding to a university, onboarding to an enterprise customer like a hospital, what are we doing to try to solve that problem? So there's a bunch of solutions out there. Every vendor has their kind of secret sauce on top of it. What's the industry doing? And and what I would say is, from an industry perspective, we have multiple organizations, right? We have the IEEE, we have the Wi-Fi Alliance. There's the CSA Matter group that's out there doing, wonderful things as well. And I think from an industry perspective, what we're trying to do is coalesce around what's the least friction we can do to get devices, whether it's an IoT device, all the way up to an enterprise device, onto the network.
I like your use of the word friction. I've been known to say fast, free, and frictionless, talking about public Wi-Fi for many decades now. Because I see Wi-Fi as not a right, but if you're going to deliver public Wi-Fi, then don't make it difficult. But that friction can be very difficult for both the infrastructure side and the end client, which is kind of leads me to my question on what I had overheard you talking to some other people earlier today. The whole DPSK, PPSK, some version of dynamic PSK. To fix that problem, we we don't want to go through the hassle of going to .1x, and it's difficult and it's scary, and we have to maintain databases. Can we get like someplace there that's not a shared PSK that everyone can crack?
Yeah, so this is this is one of those things that we're working on across multiple industry organizations right now, and it's a really interesting case because one of the things that happened with WPA2 PSK was, everybody shares the same PSK, and the PSK was actually used to create the cryptographic keys to, protect everybody's traffic.
And we've had classes here, and I've taught lots of classes where we have encrypted frames. Mm-hmm. We figure out what the PSK is. We drop it into Wireshark, and there we can read all your frames.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even cloud services out there now where it's like you don't even have to be technically savvy, where you can just do a packet capture of a bunch of frames, dump it in, and they'll send you every PSK they can crack out of that. So then we created WPA3, which was specifically defined. Oh, sorry.
By the way, when you just said that, I am sure there's some listeners who are just now thinking, can you put the URL to that place in the show notes? No, I'm not going to put that.
No, absolutely not. And we're not promoting it either. So, but it's one of those things where as compute power and other things, cloud resources, things become easier, which is kind of the impetus on why we're like, we need to really kind of transition not only from a AP, so working for Cisco, being an AP vendor, we also need station vendors, and we need the customers asking for, let's give me some alternatives to having IoT devices and other devices connect to the network, and not in 2025 still only supporting PSK. So, really what we did, whether it was when crack came out and a bunch of other attacks came out, WPA3 Personal using SEE was created specifically to address the problems we were having with PSK. Now, in that time frame, there became the use of personal PSKs, and I like to call them kind of like vanity PSKs, right? Because it's just, I create my name and then I can use that.
And they are incredibly useful in like MDU, where I can go in the same day I move into my apartment, I get my Wi-Fi access, and now all of my devices are on my VLAN. I can go down to the pool and print to my printer. Mm-hmm. It's very nice stuff. So,
and I would love to have a deep conversation on this, because where I kind of sit is this: we're in the crossroads between what we had with PSKs and kind of the functionality we see in what our enterprise customers do, which is not only do I want to authenticate my device on the network, I also want to provide some kind of differentiated authorization. As you said, putting them in a VLAN, maybe assigning them into a different subnet, or providing some kind of differentiated policy. And it's hard to do when we all share the same passphrase. And that's where
nearly impossible, yeah.
And so that's where if I created a differentiated passphrase for each device, but however, I'm still using the passphrase to authenticate and authorize the person.
Well, because it's easy.
Because it's easy. And I 100% agree with you. It's easy.
In the security world, it's like, well, you want easy or secure? They don't always
This is the trade-off that we're all involved. Every day that we're trying to do something with security in the Wi-Fi space, and it's because Wi-Fi is ubiquitous, right? We have everything from home users all the way up to very, very security conscious enterprise customers, and we've got to strike that balance. And there's a lot of debate going on right now, like how with WPA3, how do we solve this or even address this? I'll call it personal grouping of device construct that we're working on right now.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of vendor solutions pretending to work, not pretending. They have solutions that work in this space. It is not consistent. It's not the same. It's a wild west out there for those. And yet what they're still trying to do is we want to end up with WPA3, but we can't start there. So how do we kind of mash our way over?
Yeah, and that's really the interesting thing is we had a problem, created a solution, and then in that interim, they found use cases for the problem. So how do you address it with the solution that was created to solve the problem? So, what we're really trying to work forward. And I think the challenge is, no matter what happens in industry, because we deal with legacy devices, any device that wants to take advantage of this thing that comes out is going to need a software upgrade.
So any possible solutions that you see on the roadmap coming forward?
Yeah, there's work, if I look at this from my Cisco lens, there's work continually going on in the issue. We hear everybody loud and clear that we need a solution. It's what is the most effective solution long term? So, like doing PPSK and other things, is PSK is doing kind of a passphrase based thing long term? Is it, as you'd mentioned before, so .1x, is it difficult? Should we look at doing something to make it easier to consume or username and passwords?
I see a couple of paths. One is on the infrastructure side. We can and should make implementation of that simpler. Mm-hmm. It's been the realm of companies who like to sell a sometimes very expensive solution to try to ease that. But as an actual protocol, it's not that difficult. But we've wrapped it in some difficult pieces. The other side is on the client side. How do we get the end user to use a .1x solution without them knowing how to use a .1x solution?
Right.
And so there's some like we've been doing Passpoint here at the show, and for some things like if you're using a SIM, we can use SIM off, and if you just happen to have the right vendor, AT&T, T-Mobile, Google Fi, you walk in the room and we use your SIM to do the authentication, and you get a .1x connection, mm-hmm. not only encrypted cleanly, but we could even assign you your own VLAN. I mean, it's full sure. capable of .1x. If you don't, then you have to do something extra, which sometimes makes end users uncomfortable. Adding a profile, clicking yes on a certificate, those kind of things.
Specifically on headless devices as well, right? So, yeah. And I 100% agree with you, right? And again, this goes back to the friction comment. We need to, in headless IoT devices, we need to kind of decrease as much friction as possible. And,
any movement in that direction?
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of need a cert, but that can be done in manufacturing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So there's secure unique device identifiers as an onboarding mechanism, right? Not the permanent mechanism, but you can use these secure and unique device identifiers as the priming capability to get on the network, and then reissue it another one. Not saying that that's the end all be all solution, but these are some of the things that as Cisco we're looking at, like how we onboard our own what I would say our own IoT devices. Like they're shipping from us with a certificate on them. Can we use that as identity to at least onboard them to the network? And then if you need to, you can replace them with a locally significant certificate if you have your own CA mm-hmm. or some other mechanism on top of that.
And that's one of those things that can be made easier with other policies, other products that can fill that gap. Is there any movement to make, my first question, when you got done saying that about there's a cert in IoT, some IoT chips are incredibly inexpensive. Mm-hmm. Do you just happen to know offhand what adding a cert and .1x code to a Wi-Fi chip would end up costing?
Yeah, so I would like to say it's very inexpensive, but again, it depends on the device, depends on what chipsets they're using. But from a chipset perspective, we're not really doing anything in hardware with .1x that would impact that, right? So it's kind of the software stack that would run on top of the device from the supplicant side. And it really depends on what supplicant they decide to use. If they're an OEM, whether using something that's open sourced, a lot of that stuff is already publicly available that they can pull, WPA3, personal WPA3 enterprise. It's really from an IoT vendor perspective, what they're choosing to implement.
How could our industry, our community, those people listening to this and those attending our conference, help put pressure to get client vendors to move that direction?
That's an awesome question. So what I would say is, what I've seen as a vendor is sometimes we get asked for specific features versus specific use cases. If what would be helpful is having people define the outcomes they want. Like, I need an IoT device to be able to onboard to the network to do this. And what we see is I have a solution already in PPSK or MPSK that exists today, not kind of the end goal where we want to be, in the next generation, to be able to take advantage of like if you were to tell me, hey, I want to do PPSK, but it's WPA2 only, and we talked about this a little bit last night in the Birds of a Feather. I said, and that's awesome. You'll be able to do that thing forever in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band. You won't be able to do it with multi-link operation. But and this was part of the conversation. I'm like, but if it's an IoT device and it's not consuming what you need for like a tri-band connection in MLO, are you in a bad spot with just associating to either 2.4 or 5 gigahertz? Is that an acceptable solution?
And I'm sure for many use cases it won't make a bit of difference. But we also need to be a little forward thinking of we see 2.4 band as garbage. Well, it started out as garbage band, and it now has features that work and people like it for certain reasons, but there's other things just don't work there. 5 gig is getting a little more crowded. 6 gig maybe eventually will, but at least we have some space to breathe and move into. So I see why they want it, but we're going to have to move that direction slowly. Well, Stephen, thanks for your time. If someone wanted to track you down and ask you other questions, probably don't give your email, but how would someone find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, awesome. So you can reach me. I'm on X at Stephen M. Orr. I'm also on LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out in either location. And I'm more than happy to answer questions, even engage in some interesting chats on, kind of where we're going from a security perspective and the trade-offs between interop and secure networking. So
thank you very much for that. We've been talking today with Stephen Orr about Wi-Fi security and a bunch of the features around that. If you like this topic and you want to hear more like it, please go on the Packet Pushers website and give us your comments. This has been another episode of Heavy Wireless. My name is Keith Parsons, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.